Welcome to the AMATIC 2015 webinar series. My name is John Oakes and I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for AMATIC. And today's presentation is Modern Intro Stats with Rob Gould. And this presentation is sponsored by the Joint Committee of AMATIC and the American Statistical Association, or ASA. And AMATIC is the American Mathematical Association of two-year colleges, and our core value is building expertise and exhibiting leadership in the teaching and learning of mathematics, enhancing personal growth, and improving teaching methods and effectiveness as a personally initiated lifelong responsibility. And for more information, please visit our website at amatic.org. Is anyone else having trouble hearing me? I have two people who say they cannot. Okay, sound is good. So please. Okay, so I'm going to try. Well, I think I spelled everyone incorrectly, but if I could have Rob log back out and log back on, if somebody could, I'll do that. Okay, and there's always some sort of technical difficulty, I suppose. So Rob just is in here again. So we have a Rob 2 now. So Rob just reproduced himself right in the middle of the webinar. So please note that the views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATIC, and any commercial products mentioned by peers are not endorsed by AMATIC. And with that being, WebAssign is proud to support the AMATIC web series. And now we're going to switch to the presenter slide. So I do have them right here and ready to go. So hopefully I'm introducing Rob. He'll be able to me and get his speakers working. So Gould earned his PhD in mathematics at UC San Diego in 1994, and since that time has been on the faculty of the Statistics Department at UCLA, where he directs the undergraduate education program. He is acting in the American Statistical Association beginning in January and will be the chair of the AMATIC ASA Joint Committee, and he was made fellow of the ASA in 2012. He was on the writing team for the 2005 Gaze College Report and is co-author with Colleen Ryan of an introductory statistics book, Exploring the World Through Data. So with that being said, if you could all welcome Rob in the chat room, that would be great. And I'm going to turn it over to Rob now.
All right, so first thing is if someone could tell me if they can hear me. And I'm very happy to be here. Great to see so many of you and see some familiar names. Today I want to talk about, it's the start of the year, so I hope to be a little inspiring and kind of give you an overview of some ideas that you can use to kind of inspire your students. I think statistics is one of the most important classes our students take, and I'm very excited to share that excitement with you. So the basic outline is I'm going to talk about what the Gaze recommendations are, and then talk about why data are so important, and then give two examples of activities that we're just going to kind of walk through very quickly, faster than you would in a classroom, that will help kind of illustrate some of these principles. If you have any clarification questions, please maybe type in the word clarification or something so I can pick them out from the chat cycle, and I'd be happy to answer those. And then we have time at the end to answer more in-depth questions. So GAZE is an acronym, the Guidelines for Assessment and Instruction in Statistics Education. You can find them at this website here, and I've repeated this website link at the end of the talk, and of course you can go back to the recordings and see it from there. There are two versions. There's a pre-K through 12 report, and I know none of us teach that, but it's a really interesting report, and I hope you'll read it. It talks about some kind of fundamental things like just what is a statistical concept, and talks about how they develop. And I think it's a really nice thing to think about and to see. The college report is a little more matter of fact, and was endorsed by Amatic in 2005 also. And so I want to kind of step through really quickly some of the features of these guidelines. They boil down to 6 recommendations. I'll read them to you. The first, statistical literacy and develop statistical thinking. So these are 2 kind of vague terms. In my way of thinking, statistical thinking is the larger, more complete of them because it includes statistical literacy. You can't think statistically without statistical literacy. And pretty much the focus of the talk today is to give some examples of what at least I mean by statistical thinking. Um, Recommendation number 2 is to use real data. What's missing here, but is implied, is to use real data realistically, which is not that easy all the time. So I hope to talk about that as well. Stress conceptual understanding rather than just procedural knowledge. And that means it's not enough to know how, but we also need to know why and when. So we'll talk about that as well. Foster active learning in the classroom. I'll be doing less of that today. Use technology to develop conceptual understanding and to analyze data. So the examples I'm showing you are more on the analyze data side of things.
Rob, can you hear me? Okay. I I know. Okay. Let me put up note to Rob that we lost audio again. I think it might be on his end. There's connection problems. Okay. I'm going to try to put a note up here. That's odd because he's okay. So he's going to log back and on again. My apologies for the wait. My audio was going a little in and out earlier, so I think it might just be a connection problem for some reason. I was working with Rob perfectly earlier. Yes, Peg, it does happen sometimes. It just technical difficulty. There's not much you can do if somebody's audio goes out. I appreciate the patience. I think this is the first time that we've had an extended audio problem, though, so I notice if you guys don't mind, while you are waiting for Rob to come back on, a couple of you mentioned that you're familiar with the gaze standards. If you wouldn't mind saying if you've implemented them in your classes already, or the recommendations, or how you're using them, I would love to hear. Some of you seem to be familiar with them, but you are not implementing them yet. That's fine as well. Okay, for some reason Rob is still not back on. Okay, so I think Rob just came back on. Let's see. Okay, Rob, can you hear
Yeah.
me now?
Yeah, I'm back with you.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone else hear Rob? All
All
right,
right, so
thank you very
sorry
much.
about this. Not too sure what's happening, but we'll keep going on. Um, so let me go on and talk about why data is such an important topic, and especially that thing about using real data. In a nutshell, statistics is the science of data, and it's concerned with these issues of what we can learn from data, what we can't learn, what are the limits of our knowledge, how do we communicate our findings, and I don't know a more elegant way of saying this, but how do you find findings? What are the processes you look for? So data is extremely important to the field, and real data is even more important. Oops, now I've lost the presentation, I'm afraid. There we go. John, it says switch to presenter slides.
Yes, give me a second to bring it back up. I'm not. You may have hit something, and I don't know about it. So
Okay, all right,
okay, there it is.
thank you. So I'm sorry, some of these slides didn't come out all the way, but this slide says the data deluge, and I want to kind of contrast the situation that I at least was educated in, and probably most of us, with the situation today. So it used to be that data were small and tiny and used only by scientists and maybe professionals, marketers, um, people in particular areas of business. Um, these data set were almost always collected with an eye to doing statistical inference. And for that reason, they usually involve doing random sampling or random assignment. And most importantly, they were created by a human who had a reason for for collecting these data, and so I call that they were created with a strict intent. There was a research hypothesis and data collected to answer that. And as a result, they usually came from well-defined studies. They didn't have too many variables. And so it fit kind of neatly into the spreadsheet format with the rows being observations and the columns being variables. So let's contrast that with the situation we live in today. I mean, modern data now is often collected by machines. Humans organize it, but it's kind of what I call an algorithmic data collection process. Machine just has an algorithm it follows. It doesn't know why it's collecting the data. It just is. Because it's so easy to do this, people are happy to collect lots and lots of variables. So modern data often has a very large number of variables and a very large number of observations. Sometimes there's no purpose in mind. I mean, there businesses, the grocery store is collecting data on every purchase you make just because it can. It may not be knowing what to do with it, but it's just storing it all up somewhere. As a result, these data often have very complex structures, and it's quite true that many companies employ lots of people who work just to get this from the data from the complex structure into a spreadsheet format so that it can be used to answer some questions. And I think a really important point is data is no longer just words and music and images. It also, I mean, it no longer is just numbers. It's now words and musics and images. It's the fundamental unit that we can analyze and that we're often interested in is no longer just a number. So with this in mind, I want to give you two parables. One is a cautionary story, and the other is more uplifting, I hope. So here's the story. An angry man shows up at his local Target and shows them a bunch of coupons for baby items addressed to his teenage daughter. I think she was 15 or 16. So obviously the man was extremely angry, and Target understood and apologized. But later the man had to call back and apologize himself, um, because his daughter was in fact pregnant. So the question is, how did Target know if the father did not? I don't find it too surprising. The father did not. So the real surprising part is how did Target know? So Forbes magazine followed through on this and did an investigation, and you can also read a story about it in the New Yorker. Um, they interviewed a Target statistician, and he said, well, they've identified 25 products that allowed them to assign a pregnancy score to shoppers. And as a hypothetical example, a female consumer who lives in Atlanta and purchases a blue rug and some dietary supplements and some hand and body lotion and a blue handbag has an 85% chance of being pregnant, according to Target. So, so you know, this is an extremely complex sort of interactions that they're looking at, and raises all sorts of concerns, and obviously has implications with how we think about privacy in this age of data. So another story is Pizza Girl. So Pizza Girl is a real person. She runs this blog called the Diary of a Pizza Girl, and she delivers pizzas in Austin, Texas. I don't know her. I just stumbled across her blog. What's interesting for our purposes is she also collects data. And here's an example of her data. This is the time she arrives at work and what happens at each of these different times. And the reason she collected this, she explains in her blog, is that she had these two questions. How is my time most profitably spent? And, and she asked this question because this is the way her business worked. While she was there, she got paid by the hour. But if she wanted to deliver pizza, or if she had to deliver pizza, she had to punch out. So she was no longer paid. And her salary then consisted of whatever she made in tips. So she was senior enough that she could make decisions about, am I going to go out on this run or am I not? And to do that, she wanted some idea of how could she predict what her tip would be. And one of the questions she came up with is, well, maybe the method of payment affects the tip. So when people order their pizzas, they have to say how they plan to pay. And she kind of hoped that this data would help her understand how she could do that. So on her blog, you can follow, she makes some attempts, and they're not bad. But at this point, we enter in with Jared P. Lander. So he's wrote his master's thesis in statistics at Columbia University on New York pizza, how to find the best. So, if this were a love story, it would be inevitable that they would meet, but it's not. As far as I know, they've never met. Don't know if they even know each other. But nonetheless, they communicated through this blog. And he analyzed her data and produced this box plot for her. So on the horizontal axis, you can see how people paid. So only one person paid by check. The vertical axis is telling us how much they paid. So you get a pretty good picture here of what things are like. So, prepaid, typical tip is about $2.50, but there's lots of variability, anywhere from $5 down to $1. Credit, it's not so great. The typical is about 3, but that's kind of on about the most you can expect. But those who are paying cash, and the typical tip was about $4, and there's not a whole lot of variability there. Half of them are between $3 and $4. So based on this, she was able to say, great, I know now if they're paying cash, that's kind of the most profitable sort of employee I have. And so she was able to make some decisions based on this. So the moral of these stories is the Target story reminds us that big data can undermine anonymity. So whether we think it's working or not, or what we know about data, even if we're not aware of what's going on or that data are being collected, they can harm us. The Pizza Girl story, though, is the other side. It reminds us that data can be empowering if we know when to collect it, how to share it, which is, I think, really the important part here for this story, and how to interpret it. So I think Pizza Girl is a great example of the sort of student we might imagine ourselves having. We don't expect all of our students to become statisticians. We may not expect any of them to become statisticians, and less like me, you have statistics majors. But you do want them to take away from the class a sort of data sense, a sort of sense that data can help them. and an indication of how to share that data with others and how to ask the right questions so that they can take advantage of the data. So there's an important point here, is that data can't be ignored. I would say as little as 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, you could ignore data. You could go through school and not really know anything about it. But today, data can harm you whether you know anything about it or not. And knowing something about how data are used in our society, it's not going to insulate you completely from the harm it might do, but it can help you make better choices and maybe protect you a little bit. On the more positive side of this, if you understand some basics of data analysis, we live in an age when there are many more opportunities for empowerment than we had 10 years ago. And so if you don't understand some basics of data analysis, those opportunities for empowerment will pass us by. So important point, if nothing else, data cannot be ignored. So how then do we prepare our students to live in this world? So for me, the big point.
Okay, I think there may just be a problem with the server because Bob went out again. So let me try to get his attention. We lost your audio again. Alright, so let's see if we can get Rob to be a presenter. Alright, Rob, can you hear us now?
I can.
Okay, there we go. Alright, I'm going to hide this again.
Okay, so I want to show you some two things. One is a way of getting students to think, employ statistical thinking with real data, and then also an opportunity to let them think about the role that data play in their lives. So this is the data cycle. It goes by other names, and it's been published in many different situations. Um, and I want to kind of show how you can use this in class, both as a way of guiding your students, and it can maybe also be used as an assessment tool. Um, Basically, these are 4 stages of an investigation that rotate around a big question. And a big question, some people call that a research question. It's a big topic, and we analyze data around that topic. So let me just work with a real example. Maybe our big question is, how do Americans spend their time? What I want to do now is kind of rotate around this cycle once, just to show you how it's done, and give you some idea of how statistical thinking might play out with this. We're going to use a particular data set, the American time use data. This is a survey that the Bureau of Labor conducts. They randomly sample some people, and then for those people, they randomly choose a day to interview them, and they basically try to get a picture of what they did, every single activity they did during that day, and how long it took them to do that activity. So it's a great data set, and we're going to try to explore this. And what we're going to do now is just go around that cycle and cover each of those 4 areas. So the first is statistical questions. This is the hardest. I think those of us who were raised to be mathematicians were not necessarily raised to think and be too curious about the world around us, except for the world of numbers. And so we need some practice learning how to ask questions about the world. So statistical questions are questions that can be answered, that are questions about the world or about a process that can be answered with data. And an important characteristic is that they address variability, either implicitly or explicitly. So the question, what's that variable name mean, is an important question to ask when you're looking at a data set, but it's not a statistical question. How many observations are in the data set is another important question to ask, but it's not statistical. Here's another one that is not statistical. How many hours did or how many minutes did I spend yesterday playing sports? There is an answer to that. There's no variability. It's a number I would give if the interviewer asked me, but it's not a statistical question. A statistical question in this framework would be typically how much time do people in the United States spend playing sports? This is statistical because it's addressing this notion of variability. It's about a group of people who vary, and that phrase typically there is saying, I recognize that there's variability. I'm having to find some way of, finding a characteristic that I want to address in that data set, that variable data set. So we're going to stick with this statistical question, even though it's not terribly thrilling, and see how it plays out in the data cycle. So the next set in the data cycle is to go to the data. And this may mean many different things. It might mean that you're going to go to the internet and see if there's a relevant data set out there for you. It might mean that you design a study and collect your own data. But often in the classroom, it means you're going to use the data set we've given you, and you're going to look and see if that helps you answer these questions. And then there's all these sorts of things you need to do. You need to see if you understand what the variables mean, if you understand how the data were collected. You need to examine whether this is really relevant to the question you were asking. Lots of different things along those lines. And most importantly, you need to see which variables are we going to use to answer this question. So here's a screenshot of the data set. These are just a few of the columns. To the right, you can see mostly numbers, and all these numbers represent the number of minutes people spent doing things. And I confess I don't remember what everything here means. I've circled the word sports, though. That's the number of minutes people reported playing sports on the random day that they were selected. To the left are a whole bunch of demographic variables like gender, whether you're physically challenged, whether you're head of the household, how many people in the household, income, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a pretty rich data set. But we've done the first step here. We found a variable that would actually address our question. And so we've completed the first two stages of the data cycle, and we're ready for the third. So the third is analysis. So an analysis means could be many things. One is you make a statistical graph. One is you may compute numerical summaries. Or it may be more complex. You may fit a model and go through all the sort of steps that are required in model fitting. I'm going to keep it very simple here and just say, let's just make a graph. So one thing to keep in mind when you're teaching students about how to analyze, and I'm going to hopefully fill this out a little bit, is encourage your students not to think in terms of right or wrong, which can be a kind of debilitating way, a frightening way of approaching a problem. Get them to do something, get them to do anything, and encourage them to think in terms of going from poor to good and good to better. Software makes it really easy now to do something. And then once you've done that something, we want to kind of engage in critical thinking and see, is this good? Is this bad? Could it be made better? So as an example, if you just said, make a graphic with this data, I would say some large percentage of your students are going to make a pie chart. Students just love pie charts. By the way, I'm using StatCrunch, and StatCrunch is a menu-driven software. And software is one of those things that we often don't have control over in our own classroom, even though it makes a tremendous effect on the feel of our class. But in this context, menu-driven software, statistical software is kind of nice because students don't have to they can just try something and see if it works. And I just encourage them to do that. I mean, they know how to look at the menu and choose things from it. And the menus are pretty clearly labeled. So if you just say, make a graph using this variable, they can figure that out. Now, they may not produce a good graph. And what I'm showing you here, it's not uninterpretable. I mean, right away we see, it looks a lot like Pac-Man, and it looks like almost everyone spends 0 to 200 minutes playing sports. So there's some information there, but can this graph be improved? And yeah, absolutely. It's a poor graph, and we can do better. It doesn't help. It's poor because it doesn't really help us answer our questions.
So I'm assuming it's the audio again, so I put up the sign for Rob that the audio is out. At least I have some sort of signal. Alright, so we'll wait Rob to come back on. His connection might be bad. It was not like earlier. And there have been several of you who've been logging in, out and in. I'm assuming that there are some connection issues today. Right, I think, Kelly, you were one of the people logging out and in. Okay, so Rob is gone, so that means he should be coming in again any second. Rob, guest, is entering the room. Alright, Rob, hopefully we have you now.
Yeah, my apologies. I don't know what's happening, but thank you for being patient. So after trying that pie chart, which was not great, but was not wrong, a histogram is a step towards doing something better. And so granted, students need to be helped learning to interpret this histogram, but we get much closer to our answer here than we did with the previous graph. So we can kind of see here, that the typical amount of time again looks to be in this first bin, which goes from about 0 to 50 minutes. But what really strikes your attention in this is almost everyone is not playing many sports on any given day. And this brings us to the interpretation. Sorry, I'm having there, I think it's not displaying on my screen. I'm not seeing the full thing. Brings us to the interpretation step. One of the things you do in interpretation is you answer the question that you asked. Thank you, John. So we asked the question, what is the typical amount of time people spend playing sports? And now we use our analysis, this graph, to answer that question. And often when we do that, new questions come up. And in this case, it's kind of startling that so many people don't play sports or didn't play many sports that day. So maybe we asked the wrong question and we need to go back to the start of the data cycle. So almost, our observation is on any given day, almost everyone is not playing a sport or very little. In fact, if you look at the data itself, those are mostly zeros. So maybe what we're really interested in those who are playing sports. We want to focus in on those who played any sort of sports at all, or maybe people in a certain age group. This data set includes very young people and very old people. Maybe there's an age range we want to focus on. Or maybe we just want to look to see what happens weekends, because clearly people aren't going to be don't have the time on the weekdays. So then we want to go to the data step and say, well, is there a variable that'll let us refine the question in this way? So by going through that process, we're spinning around the data cycle again, and we're iterating on a better and better answer and on a better and better set of questions. So this is really what's meant by statistical thinking. It's engaging in that entire cycle to try and understand answers to questions that we can address with these data sets. So the moral of this exercise, if there is one, is it's important to let students find the variables that answer the questions that you pose. So I would get started by posing some questions to the students, giving them the data and giving them that experience. Too often we ask them questions and there are only two variables in the data set, and so they know what to do. But having to go through a data set like this is a more realistic experience, and also is a lot more fun and a lot more engaging. On the other hand, you should give students practice giving them data sets and asking them to come up with questions. So I put them into groups in lecture and I say, here are the variables, here's the story behind the data. I want you each, working in pairs to come up with maybe 2 statistical questions that we can answer. And sometimes I'll put constraints. One question has to have just one variable, another has to rely on 2 variables. And sometimes, just for extra credit, maybe come up with one that uses 3 variables or more. That can be tricky, but it's kind of fun. And actually, students will often get there on their own. as they start to kind of play these what if questions and try to understand. So back to the sports thing, we started with a one variable question. What's the typical amount of time spent playing sports? I only had to look at that sports variable. But we refined it to a two variable question, something like, maybe I want to focus on weekends. So maybe I need to have a variable that tells me whether it's a weekend or a weekday, something like that. Another point is to let students make any graph or analysis they want, and then make sure they can make sense out of it and help them learn how to interpret it. And then nudge them, if you need to, towards something that's better. And the last point, I think, is it's important for them to keep track of where they are in that cycle. They need to be aware. I mean, the cycle, I've learned, is a really nice way. Students always kind of wonder what's next. And this is a nice way of getting them onto that what's next step. So if they've done an interpretation, they might be done, or they might try to think about, well, what other questions does this raise now? And can I go back around again? Another idea is to help students become aware of the data around them. And this is kind of, the first example I gave you is addressing the empowerment theme, giving them practice, learning how data might empower them. This is on the cautionary theme of being wary of how data are around us. This is an idea that my colleague Mark Hansen proposed. And then I've done it in my class a few times, and I shared it with Ellen Gundlach at Purdue. I think she's at Purdue. And she created this kind of neat spreadsheet. You kind of see everything there is, the rest is just blank lines. And she hands this out to her students, and this works much better than what I was doing. But basically, you ask the students for the next 24 hours to keep a data diary. And every time, they should write down everything that they do that someone could collect electronic data about. So she gives some good examples there. You're driving your car, and you've got your GPS thing on, and so someone, maybe if they're eavesdropping, could have that GPS data. Your car is keeping track of your speed, it's keeping track of your gas consumption, all that's being stored somewhere. That's another set of data that's being collected. You're trying to build up a sense of what your data trail looks like, all the data that you kind of collect as you go through your day. And you can also do this retrospectively, saying, I want you to think about the last 24 hours, and then kind of do this in class on the first day. But it really is a little more powerful to think about it moving forward, because it helps them become aware as they go through their day about where data are being collected about them. And then you have them the next day bring their things in and ask this question. If someone else had these data and
So I think one more time we lost Rob again. Yes, the solar flares are definitely pop. Wouldn't disagree with that. We're in for a great season of global warming too, I'm sure. Alright, so can you hear us now, Rob? Hopefully Rob can hear us. Okay, we'll up the notice again, just in case that, well, I'm sure Rob knows that we cannot hear him. I did hear from my local weatherman that this is predicted to be one of the warmest upcoming winters on record, matching the 1998 winter. So that was the fifth warmest winter ever. So it doesn't surprise me that this is happening. So okay.
Now I can hear you. I've just when I get kicked out, it doesn't let me get back on for a bit. So
Be fine in a second. All right, there we go.
So yeah, we're almost done too. So basically, the idea here is to get them to think about what someone else could learn about you with your data trail. And I have students who live in the dorms, and so they'll notice that, well, whenever they go into the cafeteria, they swipe a card, and they often pay for their food with a card. And so someone would know a lot about what they were eating and when they were eating it, and maybe learn some things they didn't want them to know. And you might want to focus this discussion just on what could be learned from a smartphone, because there's quite a bit. And if you do focus on that, then this is a link to a great video that talks about all the data that's collected when you're using these apps. And it's kind of can be alarming and an eye-opening thing to understand. So we started out with the 6 recommendations, and I think this notion of giving them an activity that goes around the data cycle is a great way of addressing that first one, of emphasizing statistical literacy and develop statistical thinking. And this is an activity you can do again and again. In the beginning, they will only know maybe graphical summaries. Then later they'll know numerical summaries, and later on they'll be able to ask more complex questions that go beyond the data set and ask them to do inference about a larger world. We talked about using real data, and I saw that John posted some one particular site, and I have a link to the data at the end of this. Stress conceptual understanding. I think, I hope I illustrated how that might happen. I mean, the computer was doing all the procedures. The computer was creating the graphs. What we were really trying to get them to focus on was, what does that graph mean? Does it answer the question? Is it meaningful? Is it appropriate? Foster active learning in the classroom. That somewhat did that, but I think if when I do this activity, especially in the beginning of the year, I do it with the whole class discussion. So kind of everyone is participating. They pair up to come up with questions, and then I choose a question. And naturally, it's a question I'm kind of prepared to choose, but they always come up with one of their statistical questions is something I'm prepared for, and kind of walk them through the analysis. And then they usually start to take over and direct and come up with more questions on their own. And so that's about using technology to develop conceptual understanding, and also about analyzing data. And we didn't talk about the last one, but I hope that's okay. So here are some references that you might find useful. If you have a StatCrunch account, I've created a clean version of the American Time Use Survey that you can search for, and it's called ATUS, American Time Use Survey. Or you can get your own, but it'll take you a while to clean it up. Some websites I highly recommend. The amstat.org education has lots of resources for undergraduates. Cosweb.org is a kind of a one-stop shop for resources for teaching statistics, in particular introductory statistics. And then schematic.stat.ucla.edu is a project that's now dormant but still exists, and it's basically an online course. And it says that you can take the course, but now all the materials are up there. You can walk your own self through it. So it's kind of intended as a professional development tool for new teachers who are new to teaching college level introductory statistics. So I know Glenn Miller was part of that project. I saw his name earlier. Hopefully he's still on. So that's a website you might want to check out. And then NCTM has a book also about what some of the essential understandings are. And again, it's geared towards high school, but a lot of them apply to this introductory course. So that's all from me, and I thank you for your patience. I know it was a little hard to stick with it, but if you have questions now, I would love to take them while I can.
So let's all thank Rob again in the chat room. Even though there were technical difficulties, I think this was a great and informational session today. And are these websites on the AMATIC statistics resource page? I think that I'm not sure about that actually, but I'm going to work with Rob to make sure that these links are made available after the webinar, if that works with you, Rob.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not sure either.
All right, and let's see. I'm going to hide these now. And put up these slides at the end. Are there any questions for Rob right now? I feel like, Rob, the main questions are about how do we get these resources and start using them, because they are great resources, and I feel like you gave some great examples today, and I think a lot of others feel that way as well. So Bernie has a question, so I'll let you answer that question.
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I mean, I think in the intro stats course as it's done through a math department, students will learn to be a little more reflective and careful about the conditions under which inferences can be done, and also understand the very important mathematical properties of some of these numerical summaries. So, for example, the concept of the mean of a sample of data as the balancing point of the distribution. I think that's something that they won't get out of a chemistry course or something along those lines. How does this go beyond the Common Core statistics strand? Um, well, I mean, I guess I'm not quite sure what that means. The Common Core statistics strand has some particular models. It tries to develop statistical models um, in the senior year of high school. It does some more general statistical thinking things freshman and sophomore year, if I remember right. Um, so, I mean, this is kind of building on that. I think what they won't get much practice in the high school is working with these more large and complex data sets, and um, they may not get as much practice, and they may not be aware of this larger societal role that data plays in their lives. Kelly Fitzpatrick writes, math course due to computation and formulas. I'm not, is that an answer to another question? Or, okay, thanks.
All right, well, thanks again to all of you for participating in today's AMATIC webinar, and thanks to you, Rob, for the great presentation. And if you'd like to support future AMATIC webinars, please consider becoming a member of AMATIC at bit.ly/join-AMATIC. And please remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/AMATIC. And recordings of past AMATIC webinars, including this one, can be found at bit.ly/AMATIC-webinars, and it typically takes us 1 to 2 weeks to produce and upload webinars to this archive. So I'll let you all know when this webinar has been posted there. And please take 2 minutes to evaluate the webinar content and the presenter at bit.ly/amatic38. If you need email confirmation of your participation in this webinar, please fill in the optional section at the end of the evaluation. So you can either go to that link by typing it into your web browser or clicking on it right on the screen. And let's see, I see that there's a couple more comments. Well, thank you for attending, Kelly.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And let's see, yes, you can say that you hope to see people at US COTS 2017.
Let me just
So,
add one thing to Ralph's too. I mean, Ralph, that's a good point. Almost most of the homework we give is stuck in that analysis phase, and it's an important phase, but it's just one part of the whole process. So part of my goal here is to get us to start to think about how to put that phase in the right context. More interpretation and more questions. Well, I thank you all, and I think we'll log off now. And please contact.
yes, I'm going to end the recording now.